I apologize. It's taken me a little bit of time to get all of my eggs in one basket to take care of this video for you. That aside, let's look at chapter 11. Chapter 11 starts with personality. Personality is that stuff that makes all human creatures go to some degree or other. And the first approach that's noted in Bernstein's text is the psychodynamic approach. If you remember from earlier chapters that the psychodynamic approach was developed by Sigmund Freud, and it emphasizes the interplay of the unconscious psychological processes in determining human thought, their feelings, and even behavior. Now, the basis of this approach is that psychological factors play a major role in determining behavior and how it is that that behavior shapes personality. So let's look at the structure and the development of personality. According to Freud, personality develops out of each person's struggle to satisfy their basic needs for food, water, air, sex, and even aggression. Personality is reflected in how each person goes about satisfying those particular needs. He breaks the personality into three different categories, basically the id, the ego, and the superego. Personality is comprised of those three structures. The id operates according to what is known as the pleasure principle. It contains all of life's instincts, called the eros, as well as death instincts, called the thanatos. It contains the libido, or psychic energy, and is a product of our life instinct. The ego operates according to what we know as the reality principle. It attempts to satisfy the impulses from the id while obeying society's rules. In other words, when your unconscious mind wants to be foolish, your ego jumps in the middle and keeps you from going to jail. As we internalize our parents' and society's rules and regulations, our superego forms then to tell us what is right and wrong. Now, when it comes to conflicts and defenses, the ego will use what Freud called defense mechanisms to protect the individual from feeling anxious about what the id wants to do. And when it comes to stages of personality development, Freud believed that personality develops in what he called psychosexual stages. Each stage is a part of the human body, and it becomes the child's main source for pleasure. Failure to resolve any sort of conflict in this stage can cause what he called a fixation, an unconscious preoccupation with the pleasure area associated with that particular stage. Personality characteristics are then a reflection of each person's fixation. Those particular stages include the oral stage, the anal stage, the Oedipus Complex, the electric complex, the latency period, and the genital stage. Let's take a look at each one of those particular stages. Now remember that each stage is based on where the person receives his or her satisfaction in life or their pleasure. When it comes to the first stage, or the oral stage, that begins, of course, in infancy, and that's during the first year of life because the mouth is the center of a person's pleasure. That's where they receive all of their satisfaction, including their food. The anal stage occurs during the second year of life, give or take a little bit, and that's, of course, is when potty training begins. If I remember correctly, one of the major things that parents love for their children to be able to do is take care of bodily functions by themselves. It also cuts down on the price of diapers. The ego evolves during that particular stage as the child moves in between id impulses, which is being able to poop whenever a child feels like he needs to poop, or the parental demand, which means basically only using the bathroom according to the bathroom rules and regulations. The phallic stage emerges at the middle of, we'll say, probably about 3 years old or so, give or take a little bit, and lasts until roughly age 5. That is when boys and girls come to understand that they have different parts from the other. A boy experiences what we know as the Oedipus Complex. What that basically means is that he has some sort of sexual desire for his mother and wants to kill his father out of jealousy. The girl develops what Freud called penis envy and begins to hate her mother for not providing her with a penis. The girl then transfers her love to the father, which is known as that electric complex. After age 5 or so, begins the latency period. That is when sexual impulses actually go underground and become very dormant. During the next stage, or the genital stage, begins in adolescence and lasts until people die. And that's when sexual desire reappears. Now, there are some variations on Freud's personality theory. Jung, for example, who was a contemporary of Freud, disagreed with a couple of particular things. Freud viewed the libido as a general life force that included a productive blending of basic impulses with the real-world demand, the demands of creativity and growth-oriented resolution of conflicts. Personality develops as the person tends toward introversion or extroversion, and then toward reliance on specific psychological functions, such as thinking versus feeling, and vice versa. Other neo-Freudian theorists included Erik Erikson, Erich Fromm, and Henry Stack Sullivan. They proposed that personality was determined by how social needs were met. A woman by the name of Karen Horney proposed that the inferiority that many women feel is caused by restrictions imposed by men, not necessarily penis envy, and that is actually men who feel inferior when they experience womb envy. Some of the contemporary psychodynamic theories include object relations, which suggests that early relationships between infants and significant objects or their parents and caregivers shape personality. Now, as the psychodynamic approach varied, other people began to evaluate it to some degree or other. Remember, Freud developed one of the most influential personality theories that has ever been proposed. Those ideas shaped Western thinking from medicine to religion. Psychodynamic therapies also introduced the use of personality assessments, including projective personality tools. Freud's theory has also been criticized for being based on an unrepresentative sample. In other words, what he used for his data were his own patients. Those particular patients tended to be upper-class Viennese women who had all kinds of mental problems. Freud never examined patients from or his theory with regard to any sort of other culture. Freudian scholars also acknowledge that Freud may have modified reports of his therapy to fit his theory and that he may have asked leading questions during that therapy. Finally, his belief that humans are driven mainly by instincts and the unconscious ignores the role of the conscious drive as well as learning as an important behavioral determinant. Next comes the trait approach, and the trait approach has three basic assumptions. First, personality traits are relatively stable and therefore predictable. Personality traits are also consistent in diverse situations, and each person has a different set or degree of particular traits. The trait approach views personality as the combination of stable internal characteristics that people display consistently across time as well as across contexts and situations. So we deal with personality traits versus personality types. Hippocrates suggested that a temperament or a personality type is associated with bodily fluid, for blood or phlegm, black bile, or yellow bile. Physiogeny is also the study of relationships between personality type and physique type. However, research has also shown that personalities are much too varied to fit into particular type theories. Allport's trait therapy or trait theory suggested that there are about 7 basic or essential traits. Secondary traits are more specific to certain situations and have less control over behavior. Eisnick suggested what we know as the Big Five model of personality. It included openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism that make up the personality. The Big Five model is supported by both Western culture and cross-cultural research. There are also some biological trait theories. Eisnick also used this factor analysis to identify 3 basic personality factors, including psychoticism, introversion and extroversion, as well as emotional stability. Emotional stability is also referred to as neuroticism. Eisnick proposed that the ease with which the nervous system can be aroused relates to the position on these personality dimensions. Newer biological theories have largely taken over Eisnick's theory and suggest that these differences are due to biological differences in the sensitivity of the brain systems that are involved with responsiveness to reward. In other words, the behavioral approach systems, and punishment, which are also known as behavioral inhibition systems. So let's look for just a moment at how, or to at least to what degree perhaps, are personality traits inherited. Data from studies of twins and adoptive children show that the genetic basis for general predisposition in a few traits, including activity level, social ability, as well as anxiety and emotionality, are involved in genetics. It's estimated that between 30 and 60% of variability in personality traits comes from genetics. Are there other ways to look at the particular evidence and perhaps consider a different interpretation? That's possible. A child's similarities to a parent could be due to social influence. For example, the child could model the parent as well as his or her siblings. Other factors such as birth order, accidents, or illness could also have an impact on personality. Now, what kind of extra evidence would help to eliminate any sort of alternative? Psychologists have studied infants, a time period in which the environment hasn't yet had a chance to have an impact, and have found differences in temperament. This suggests that biological and genetic factors are an influence. Studies also examining adoptive children have supported the role of biology and genetics in the formation of personality. However, please bear in mind that always more research is necessary. So what are some of the conclusions that we might arrive to in a reasonable fashion? The evidence does suggest that genetic influences have a significant impact on personality. However, genetic makeup probably provides only a predisposition towards certain levels of anxiety, emotionality, or social ability. These factors then interact with the environment to produce specific personality features. Trait theories are better at describing behavior than at explaining it. Also, trait theories do not create a unique description of each individual, nor can those theories reflect changes in a person's behavior in different environments or even situations. So those particular trait theories create an interesting perspective as it relates to personality, but we also need to consider the social cognitive approach. That particular approach is also referred to as social learning. It equates personality with a person's behavior. Others believe that learned thought patterns play a role in behavior and that personality is learned in social contexts. So what are the roots of social cognitive therapies? B.F. Skinner employed what he called the functional analysis to understand behavior in terms of its function in obtaining rewards or avoiding punishment. What are some of those prominent social cognitive theories? Rotter's expectancy theory suggested that behavior is determined by cognitive explanation. What that means is that what a person expects to happen following some kind of behavior and the value that a person places on that outcome. Rotter measured the degree to which people expect events to be controlled by their own internal efforts or by external forces over which they have no influence. He found that these expectations can be related to behavioral difference. Bandura suggested that personality evolves between the interaction among cognitive patterns, the environment, and behavior through a process called reciprocal determinism. For example, Albert Bandura concluded that people's beliefs about the impact they have on the world and their self-efficacy, which is the belief they will be successful, will determine emotions and behaviors. Michel's cognitive affective therapy suggested that there are variables as well as situational variables that are important to explaining behavior. The most important personal variable includes encoding or expectancies, affect, goals, as well as values, competencies, and self-regulatory plans. Now, Michel's views sparked a debate that has led to several conclusions. First, traits influence behavior only in relevant situations. Second, traits can lead to behaviors that alter situations that in turn promote different behaviors. And third, people with different traits choose to be in different situations. Fourth, traits are more influential in some circumstances than in others. So let's evaluate just for a moment the social cognitive approach. In its favor, the approach is objective, experimentally oriented, and defined by operational concepts, and it's even based on empirical data, which is always a good thing. There are some psychologists, however, that think the behaviorist narrow that the behavioral therapist's narrow focus on behavior, the environment, and even cognitive factors still ignores other potential influences on behavior. In other words, those subjective experiences, genetic as well as physiological factors. Next is the humanistic approach. It defines personalities as the unique way in which each individual perceives and interprets the world. The primary human motivator here is the innate drive toward personal growth, and it prompts people to fulfill their unique and natural potential. There are a number of prominent humanistic theories, the first one of which is Carl Rogers and what he called his self-theory. Rogers emphasized the concept of actualizing tendency, which is the innate inclination toward growth, and it motivates all human behavior. The self is what people come to identify as I or me. According to Rogers, the development of the self-concept depends on self-evaluation and the positive regard shown by other people. Differences between self-evaluations and others' evaluations will cause anxiety and then create other problems. Whenever people, instead of their behaviors, are evaluated, the conditions of worth are created. People then come to believe that they are worthy only under specific conditions. Those in which they are rewarded behaviors are displayed. Albert Maslow suggested what he called a growth theory. Maslow saw personality as the tendency to grow toward self-actualization. People can approach satisfaction of their needs with a deficiency orientation or a growth orientation. Now, remember, the humanistic approach has been instrumental in the development of many types of psychotherapy, short-term group experiences such as encounter groups, and child-rearing practices. However, the belief that all humans are driven by a positive and innate growth potential may be a tad bit naive. Also, this approach ignores potential genetic, biological, learning, social, and unconscious motivational influences on personality. More humanistic assessment methods are better at describing behavior than explaining it. Also, many humanistic concepts are difficult to measure and define scientifically. The humanistic approach is culturally confirmed in North America and other Western cultures, but the definition of self is very different in Japan or in Africa or in other parts of the world. Bear in mind, it's important to recognize the role of cultural factors in establishing the ideals of personality development, as it requires the various approaches to personality and in the achievement of self-esteem to be evaluated in terms of the extent to which it applies to other cultures. It's important to focus on research methodology. In one longitudinal study of about 1,000 individuals, a significant but only modest relationship was found between temperament at age 3 and personality and behavior at age 21. However, individual differences in adult behavior within the same temperament groups suggest that long-term consistency in behavior results from the mutual influence that temperaments and the environmental events have on one another. So, from this perspective, let's take a look at the possibility of assessing personality. Now, different aspects of behavior can be assessed by observational methods, interviews, and personality assessments. Personality tests are more standardized and economical than either observation or interviews, but a test must be reliable and valid. The typical objective test is a paper and pencil form of an instrument that contains clear, specific questions, statements, or concepts to which a person is asked to give yes or no, true or false, or multiple choice answers. Scores then can be compared mathematically. The Neuroticism, Extroversion, Openness Personality Inventory, which is also called the NEO-PIR, is given to measure personality variables in normal populations. A widely used test for diagnosing disorders is the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, also known as the MMPI. For projective personality tests, these instruments consist of unstructured stimuli that can be perceived and responded to in many ways. The thematic apperception test and the Rorschach ink blot test are examples of this format. Responses to projective personality tests reflect many aspects of an individual's personality. These tests are relatively difficult to score, and they do tend to be somewhat less reliable than valid than other objective tests. When it comes to personality tests, they seem to be useful when people are screening prospective employees. However, the tests can also lead to incorrect predictions. Some employees believe that utilizing personality tests in the selection process is a violation of their privacy. Personality is what makes the world go round. Each individual has his or her different and very personalized personality traits. Each one of us is quite different. There's a lot to understand and a lot to explore as we give consideration to personality. If I can help with anything else, provide any sort of other information related to personality, please don't hesitate to let me know. You've got the number you can text or certainly call. I look forward to being with you again in Chapter 12.